To southern Syria, where a fragile ceasefire appears to be holding for now after more than a week of deadly sectarian clashes between Bedouin tribes and Druze fighters. Government forces are also accused of violations, with the Syrian Defense Ministry promising to punish the perpetrators. In Sweida, communities caught in the crossfire are reeling from the violence. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says that more than 1,000 people have been killed in weeks of conflict, including attacks on civilians. And the United Nations says that more than 100,000 people have been displaced. DW correspondents Ibrahim and Mohammed Chreyteh have visited the region to hear from those affected. A warning: this report contains descriptions of violence.
These Bedouin tribesmen have come from all over Syria. They're trying to get to Sweida city. They tell us the fight there is far from over, and that it's their honor that's on the line.
They've slaughtered, burned, and raped our women. There are hundreds in there.
We want the bodies. We have brothers, cousins, and women in there. We want them back. We want to take the bodies. These people cannot be trusted.
That anger is directed at Druze fighters in Sweida. For days, clashes raged between them and local Bedouin tribes, exacerbated by the intervention of Syrian government forces. Despite an announced ceasefire, Bedouin tribesmen continue to flock the area, bound for Sweida. But for now, this is as close as they can get. The city center lies about 20 kilometers in that direction. We can still hear the sound of gunfire, and we can still see smoke billowing from the distance. As a very fragile ceasefire still struggles to take hold, government forces here have put up this roadblock, they tell us, to stop Bedouin fighters from joining their brethren on the other side. Tensions are at a boiling point here. The tribesmen, all armed, want to get in at any cost. They want to take matters into their own hands. They try to reason with security forces to no avail.
The state's responsible for bringing back any bodies, any captives if there's a prisoner swap. There are forces from here to Sweida. If they go in, there'll be more clashes.
The tribesmen tell us they won't leave. They have no trust in these promises. And they're not the only ones who feel that Syrian government forces can't protect them.
I have no hope. When you see your brothers and your family getting slaughtered in their own country, you feel that this is not your country. Who am I supposed to seek protection from? From the people that have violated and killed us?
Hassan Halabi is a Syrian Druze. We met him in Jaramana on the outskirts of Damascus. Like many people here, he has family in Sweida. Hassan has not heard from them since the clashes began. All he has are videos like these that have been flooding the internet, allegedly showing Bedouin fighters and security forces killing Druze in Sweida.
People are worried, terrified. We the Druze are getting threats from the areas around us.
These drone shots sent to us from central Sweida show how sectarian violence has turned the area into a ghost town. People on the ground are struggling.
The area is surrounded. Basic life necessities are missing: food, electricity, medicine, water.
We've not been able to pick up the bodies of our martyrs from their homes.
And while most Druze civilians are still trapped inside Sweida, hundreds of Bedouin families have been able to flee and have taken shelter in government-controlled areas. They tell us horror stories of Druze fighters attacking them, they say, unprovoked.
It's like a friend coming to stab you in the back. They killed my neighbor and her 5 children. They cut their heads off and then killed her. I saw this with my own eyes.
This woman tells us her daughter and other family members are being held captive by Druze fighters.
I do not know if she's alive or dead. If they slaughter her with her children, how will I know?
Syria is already reeling from more than a decade of bloody conflict. As it navigates an uncertain transition, sectarian tensions like the ones flaring up in Sweida are threatening the little cohesion the country still has. And it's the civilians, whether it's these Bedouins here or their Druze neighbors, who end up paying the highest price.
And for more, I am joined by DW correspondent Aya Ibrahim, who is joining us from Beirut. Aya, tell us a little bit more about what you saw on your trip to the Sweida region.
I think what really struck me and the other reporters that I was with in Sweida is the anger, the level of anger and how visceral it is among all groups that we were able to speak to, but also the extent of the distrust that runs very, very deep, not only between different groups like the Druze or the Bedouins or the Sunnis or other groups in the area, but also how little these different groups trust the central government in Damascus to protect them. And I think that poses perhaps one of the biggest, if not the biggest challenge in Syria's transition is how is it that you overcome these tensions and this deep-seated mistrust to authority that is, of course, it of course says something about the current government, but I think it also says about the state of the country that Bashar al-Assad has left Syria in after, decades of the Assad dynasty rule in which the government used and played different groups against each other. It's very, very different to keep the cohesion in a country at a time where it perhaps needs it the most.
How do you see the prospects then, therefore, of the ceasefire holding?
Well, as far as we could see, by the time we made it to Sweida, the ceasefire was largely holding, but it is incredibly fragile. As you saw in that report, even from quite a bit of a distance from the city center, we could still see smoke. We are, of course, in touch with people on the ground who tell us that there are skirmishes here and there. And while that ceasefire appears to be largely holding, it is very, very fragile. And I think something that is, that's something that you really only are able to fully capture when you're on the ground is how difficult it is sometimes to tell forces from each other, government forces from Bedouin forces, for example, and oftentimes the lines between them are quite blurred. For example, as I was standing at that roadblock, I was speaking to a Bedouin fighter who had come from a different part of Syria with his fellow tribesmen, and I was speaking to him. He told me that he also actually happened to be a member of security forces, but that he was there that day with his tribe. And while this is an anecdotal sort of singular case, it kind of illustrates just how confusing things are on the ground, which of course could add to the fragility of this very much needed ceasefire. The humanitarian situation in Sweida, by all accounts, is disastrous.
The interim government, meantime, has promised a probe into the killings, pledging to protect minorities. Are they serious? And do you have the sense that they are indeed capable of doing this?
Well, speaking to people on the ground, I think as there is very little mistrust in the government protecting them, even though that distrust is at varying degrees. Bedouin fighters will say that they do sort of back the government, but they do want to take matters into their own hands, for example, as we saw in the report, by bringing back the bodies of their family members and their fellow tribesmen and women. And so there's varying levels of degrees of trust within the government. But when it comes to the particular cases that are happening in Sweida, and I think it's still quite raw, especially the government forces themselves have been accused of violating civilians in these clashes. And they're accused of doing that as they have said, they have had to come in to sort of bring the warring parties away from each other. Government forces are, to a certain extent, also accused of being part of that sectarian violence, and their actions have also, they've been accused of exacerbating that situation. There's also the most recent bout of sectarian clashes that came before this one earlier this year. The sectarian violence in the coastal areas of Syria. A report by the government, an investigation was just released yesterday as the ceasefire in Sweida continues to sort of struggle to take hold. And the findings of what the government may or may not have done, its investigation of itself, have also been quite controversial. And while the report found that over 1,400 people were killed, mostly civilians, and that 300 people have been identified as being possible perpetrators and 37 have been arrested, none of those 300 people have been identified as security forces, and the government's own investigation of itself has said that no commanders, Syria's new military commanders, did not order these attacks, and that's caused quite a bit of criticism and skepticism because people on the ground, victims of these sectarian clashes in the coast, of course, do accuse the government, and so there's a lot of doubt as to whether or not the government is actually capable of investigating itself, but that is an existential question for this government. That's what human rights organizations will tell you. They need to show people that they are able to be honest and even look themselves in the eye when things like this happen and punish people among their ranks if they are indeed implicated in violations such as the ones we're seeing in Sweida, but also in the coast.
And indeed, we know that the UK-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights has which is widely considered a trusted source, we have to mention, it says that most of the victims of the clashes were Druze. How vulnerable does the Druze minority remain?
The Druze minority in Syria is vulnerable. I mean, as we also tried to show in the report, even Druze, Syrian Druze beyond Sweida do feel the brunt of these sectarian clashes. There's also a lot of hate speech and incitement against Druze in Syria now. That's something that we could hear from people quite clearly. Of course, there are these clashes, but there's also the perception that the Druze have invited Israeli, or at least some Druze factions have invited Israeli intervention in that conflict. As our viewers may remember, Israel did intervene with airstrikes on government forces and indeed on the Syrian Defense Ministry in Damascus, claiming that they have done so in protection of the Druze. And even though the Druze community in Syria is by no means united on its position towards Israel, there is that perception, a widespread perception that the actions of some Druze, some Syrian Druze has invited this foreign intervention and damage into the country. So there's a lot of incitement against them and a lot of hate speech against them. But as we've tried to show in that report, regardless of what sect or what group people may belong to, it's really civilians that bear the brunt of conflicts like this. And we have met a lot of members of the Bedouin community as well, women, children, who told us horrific, harrowing stories about what they say they experienced at the hands of Druze fighters.
DW correspondent Aya Ibrahim in Beirut, thank you.